The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions, how's it going?
It's going whipping good, man. I'd say it's...
Do 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 do. Do 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 do.
You must super whip it. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so I was really tempted to tell you about this, but I want to jump right into the game we played, because I have a thing that I think it blew my mind, so I'm hoping it's going to blow your mind, but I'm a little afraid you're going to be like, duh, obviously. So, what game did we play?
Super Castlevania 4.
Yeah, Super Castlevania 4. So, I was playing this game, I was taking my notes, and I had this feeling, and I was like, what makes this game so different from Castlevania 2 and 3 on the Nintendo? And I was like, oh, you know what it is? This is like a return to form. Like, they went back to what made the original Castlevania great. In fact, this feels a lot like the original Castlevania. It's got the same sub-weapons. Wait a minute, you even play as Simon. What is the timeline for Castlevania? So then, because I know like the show takes place in between two of the game generations, the Belmont generations, and then like Alucard is in the show, but he's also in the game because he's a vampire and he could live forever and ever, right? So like he can transcend generations. And so I looked up the timeline because that in no way informs the game design or anything about the game. So that like absolved me of research. Like this doesn't count because it's not research on the game. But by looking up the timeline, what I learned is canonically, Super Castlevania 4 is actually a remake of the first game, which is why it feels so much like the first game.
Huh. So Castlevania and Super Castlevania 4 are like these same events.
Yes. And the thing that I thought was so delightfully ridiculous about that is Nintendo, during the Super Nintendo era, just tacked the word super onto everything. But this is actually the Super Nintendo version of a Nintendo game. Like, they made this game on the Nintendo. They could have just called it Super Castlevania because that is what it is. It's not the fourth installment. It's the first installment, but supercharged. It is Super Castlevania.
Which is interesting because, and this is already kind of getting into one of my notes, but is that like you've got, there's a whole lot of lead in that you didn't have in the original, but once you enter Dracula's castle, which is where the first one started, Castlevania started, I remember looking around and saying, man, they nailed this castle. Like, it is a 1-to-1 from the original. I was like, the enemies are the same, a lot of the jumps are the same. I was like, this is pretty spot on. I remember thinking that and writing it down to discuss. So they did a good job. It telegraphs pretty well if you're paying attention.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing for me was a lot of the music is remix of the original. There's new music because there's more levels, but there's also remix of some of the original music. And I was just like, oh man, this is weird because I don't think I would have noticed this as a kid, right? But anyway, speaking of as a kid, this is a game one of my friends had, and I know that I played this game, but I also know that I didn't have access to this game until very near the time I had access to Symphony of the Night. And to me, Symphony of the Night is Castlevania. When people say Castlevania, I don't think of the original. I don't think of all the Game Boy Advanced ones that were super popular and got like crazy high review scores. I think of Symphony of the Night. So there's a lot they did in this game that is obviously setting up for Symphony of the Night. And like, you could see it in some of the visuals. You could hear it in some of the music. Even some of the level layouts and stuff. It's like, right? Like, if you know those two games well enough. So I'm going to try hard not to let my feelings about that game color this, because that was a PlayStation game. This is a mere Super Nintendo game. But when I say Castlevania, I mean Symphony of the Night. So I'm glad that I now know this is a remake of the first game because we already played the first game for the podcast. So like this is kind of a cool, unexpected coincidence we're getting here.
Yeah. For me, when people say Castlevania, I think Castlevania because I owned Castlevania, the Castlevania, and I'm right. But the so my nostalgia experience for this, I mean, I may have played it when I was a kid a little bit, but honestly, the thing that I think of the most is being in my early 20s and listening to the Ego Raptor review of this about a bajillionty time. Super Castlevania. So in the same way that you will try to not let your, Symphony of the Night color your review, your opinions, or bleed in too much, I will try my best not to spend this entire episode just quoting Ego Raptor. So
yeah, no,
we're both going to fail. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think we both had a similar problem with Link to the Past and Mega Man X, but we got through. We had our own useful, intelligent contributions to make in between like memes and references. So we need to do the shilling thing that we do. You can find this game and the list of all the games we're going to play upcoming and stuff that's in the backlog on our website. That's also where the contact form is. So if you want to request something, go do that. Probably the easiest way to shout stuff at us is on Twitter. If you're into that kind of thing, we're both on Twitter. Links for all this crap is in the show notes. And I also played through this entire game on Twitch, and man, was there a lot of swearing at the last few bosses because there's some issues there. So I do have like actual evidence that I beat Dracula. So that's all cool. You should do all that. There's also a link in the show notes to where you can rate and review us because that helps other people find the show. And if you're crazy and you want to actually give us some money, at all levels, our patrons get access to the after show. So we record after shows sometimes, and that's secret content that only patrons get. Patrons at all level get that. So as little as $1 can get more of whatever this is.
Whatever this is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a thing, a casting of pods, I'm told. If you go up to the 8-bit classic or 16-bit hero level, we will shout you out on the show as a special extra thank you. So we want to thank our 8-bit classics, John,
wielder of the dagger,
Yarno,
tosser of the axe,
and Kevin,
holder of the cross,
and our 16-bit heroes, Michael,
splasher of holy water,
Jacob,
watcher of the watch,
and David,
eater of secret roasted dungeon wall chicken. I told you I wasn't going to do good about not getting the Ego Raptor stuff in here.
I was so lazy. This is why you have to do this bit, because I was just like, oh, there's 5 weapons plus the whip. So like he can do the 5 sub weapons plus the whip, but that's way better.
Yeah, because the thing you said, oh, you're going to do the 5 weapons plus the whip. I was like, I have my 5 weapons plus 1. Yes.
Yeah. Like, nah, teaser. Spoilers, dude. Okay. We're going to talk about the visuals as we always start. I think the visuals for Super Castlevania 4 are really good, except there was this one thing that was bothering me, and I realized it only bothers me because of that Ego Raptor video. And he talks so much in that video about how in the original game that a super limited color palette, and they used it really expertly to make Simon pop out. And in this game, when you look at any individual screenshot, you don't really get that feeling. Like the enemies don't pop out. The character doesn't really pop out from the background. And yet I never felt like it was a problem. I never felt like an enemy sprung up out of nowhere. I never felt like I had no idea where Simon was on the screen, because he's basically always in the dead center of the screen, with like rare exceptions. So I don't know if I would have even noticed that if not for that friggin' Ego Raptor video we both watched like 1,000 times. But the graphics are like, each individual sprite is like, they really pushed the Super Nintendo hardware to take the original style and 16-bit it up, right? Like everything has way more detail. Things are bigger. Things are more colorful. Things have a lot more, shading and texture and stuff. And it looks good, but it doesn't like pop in that same way. And I guess fine, because it was never like, oh no, where is Simon? Oh no, where did that enemy come from? Like, things are arguably less contrasting, but not so much that it ever felt like a problem.
I will definitely agree that on two notes. One is that they did really kind of push on the individual sprites. How detailed can we make this? And as I've said before, is with pixel art, man, you put a single pixel out of place and it just looks weird. I do know for sure that the directly down hanging whip animations, like when Simon is hanging from something, right? That looks weird. More specifically, that man has glutes for days. Not glutes, quads. His quads are friggin' like enormous, man.
Well,
I
guarantee
looked at
you the glutes under his little metal skirt would also be enormous.
Yes. Yes. His upper legs and mid legs. Well, but then he clearly skips calves, you know? I mean,
Yeah,
it is the
he can't
hardest
really
place to
jump.
build. Yeah. It's the hardest place to build masts. And I get that, you know, but oh my God. I looked at that and I said, this looks silly. But again, normally you only see that animation when he's swinging back and forth and it's very dynamic. The place where it stood out to me was when you're hanging in the part of the castle that rotates around you. So I had a chance to just stare at his quads. Oh yeah, no, we'll get to that in a second. No spoilers. Okay, so that, but I will say that I did feel that this game did suffer from not making the backgrounds quite contrasting enough. Again, never really came into any huge issues with it but there were a couple of times where I wasn't certain that what I was about to jump on was actually in the foreground. It always was, you know, but I was like a little bit more hesitant. And the area where I said, okay, and I wasn't even going to write it down because I was like, well, it's not that bad. It's not a Home Alone 2 situation, right? But what really got me is then in one level, there are in the background animated skulls that like watch where you're going. And I probably took more swings on those things than a junior league baseball player who has been out with the flu for 3 months, you know?
Yeah. Well,
like,
and they played on those insecurities later because in later Castlevania games, stuff does pop out of the background like that. So there are visuals in this game that freaked me out because my association with them is from the later games. So you're right to look at that and be like, oh, well, surely it's going to pop out of the background. But no, not yet.
And you could make the argument that they're trying to do that to instill fear and uncertainty into the player. But to me, relying on the player's inability to tell foreground from background doesn't instill fear. For me, it reminds me that I'm playing a game. You know, when I start doing that type of mental calculus of, is this in the foreground or background? Those are things I should just be able to assess. What makes me feel unsure or uneasy is when all of a sudden I'm not sure if the Medusas ever stop spawning or if they're just going to keep coming forever, or, you know, whether or not this particular thing is going to hit me or how much damage it's going to do. Like those types of things make me unsure and uneasy because it's things that Simon would theoretically worry about. Simon should be able to tell what's 5 feet in front of him unless he has severe eyesight issues, in which case then I would question his dungeoneering capability.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm gonna mention this not to be a pedant, but there's no way for me to explain this without sounding like one, so please take me at my word. This game, like a lot of 2D platformers, has a foreground, which is all the stuff you can interact with, a background, and then like a mid-ground.
Yeah,
and I feel like it's
scrolling.
Yeah, because you never, like the true background, the trees or the mountains off in the distance, the stars or the moon. It's beautiful visually, and it makes the world feel like more realistic, and it gives everything more depth and perspective. But that stuff, I don't think you ever really are like, wait, can I interact with any of that? Right. And I'm not saying you're saying that. I know you're not an idiot. The problem is because they were
that.
Well,
I might be an idiot.
Don't just assume. We got to do some tests.
I mean, like, man, I don't know, man. You clearly aren't aware of the scientific. Are you an idiot?
Oh no. It's like the end of that one Twilight Zone where like we all have pig noses.
It just smash cuts. to you drinking, the head down meme, with all the alcohol.
Yeah. But there are things in the mid ground that are pretty desaturated. So it's pretty obvious, like, oh, they chose desaturated colors because it's a little further off, but not always, because of that increased level of detail. That increased level of detail means there's a limit to how many colors they could shove on the screen at once. So if you want a foreground, a midground, and a background, and you want all that detail, like, you're eventually going to start to run into some color collisions, even with the fairly powerful SNES hardware. Like, there's only so many grays and browns. So there's a lot of brickwork. You run out of grays and browns. But I do think you're right that it's not full-on experience ruining the way we have seen in the fabled Home Alone game, but it does occasionally make you proceed with, like, unjustifiable caution.
Yes, which, if anybody wants to understand that reference, we did a podcast on it. You should go check it out. But yeah, no, I'd say that the other thing to address that, just to, elephant in the room, and this is something that Ecoraptor said, so I went into it kind of knowing, that, but I wanted to experience it for myself, and I did. You are enormous. Your reach is bananas. Bananas. It's just insane, man. Like, literally, when you get the upgraded whip, on my screen, there was less screen that you were not attacking, right? So I'd say probably an eighth of the screen is you. Half of the screen is then your whip, which left like a quarter. That math isn't sus, but whatever. 3/8 of the screen that, is untouched, right? But just literally, there would be, if it's on the screen, chances are it's moving towards you, which means that the minute that you see something on the screen, if you fire your whip, you're going to hit it. There was never those weird crocodile skeleton heads that were terrifying in the original game, held no threat whatsoever, because they were always right at chest height when you generally got in touch with them. And if they started firing at you, you just fired your whip, and then you hit the fireballs and them all at the same time. So to our earlier point, they did pull a lot of the old enemies back in because it's a true remake. But then they changed the length of the whip, which I am putting into visuals, because it's very visual, right? But that changes a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of bad guys that just don't work anymore, because of that change. And
they're fodder now. They're no longer
yes.
threats. Yeah.
Right. Whereas before, where you had to make sure that you were timing your walk up the stairs just right, so that way it fired its fireball, and then you ran up real fast and then fired your whip, because your whip only went horizontally and couldn't go at every crazy angle, right? That type of stuff, is just ripped out of there. The one other quick side note that I have on that, which was Teddy was watching me play this, and so he's like, "Dada, what's that?" And I'm like, "It's a zombie." And he's like, "Okay, Dada, what's that?" And he would just ask me, but then all of a sudden I realized, I was like, "Ooh, no, just keep him engaged enough," because eventually, and then I got to stage, I think it's stage 3, stage 3, where he's like, "Dada, what's that?" I'm like, "That is a skeleton snake dragon head from the wall."
And you feel good about yourself?
I felt so good because I had earned it, right? Because right at stage 1, he started this, and I was like, "Oh no, if I just wait for it." And then I saw, the reason why I mentioned it is I saw the little dragon heads, and he was like, "Dada, what's that?" I'm like, "That's a skeleton." No, it's not. Nope, Hang on.
Not there yet. Wait for it. Yeah, if you're gonna go there, and you're so close to the reference, you do have to earn it. So I also want to talk about the whip being giant mechanically, but the way I can circle this back a little more firm-footed into visuals is, this is a decision they clearly made on purpose, because there's the whip, which leather? Is that what a regular whip is made out of? Is it leather?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's the whip. Then the first upgrade gets you to the chain whip, and then the second upgrade gets you to the giant chain whip. And so the reason I say this puts our feet more firmly on the ground back in visuals is, someone had to measure that, right? Someone drew Simon cracking the regular whip, and they were like, okay, it's this long, it covers this much ground, it can hit enemies this far away. And then the chain whip hits harder, but it doesn't have the extra reach. And then the fully upgraded whip is the giant one that you can like reach 90% across the screen with. So I will have more to say about that mechanically, but I do think it's interesting that it's not just like, oh, well, they took the sprite and they scaled it up and they didn't realize that now the whip was gigantic. No, they absolutely realized the whip was bigger and then made it even bigger. So
yeah,
you can feel it visually because the change is significant. Like your reach,
yes.
I would say it probably goes up 50%, maybe more. It's massive. And it's so much so that even in like it's fairly fast little like whip crack, like once it's actually out before, when it comes back, you can see it on screen, like how much longer your reach is, to the point where you can then confidently move through the world knowing like where out in front of you your whip will crack. But because it's so massive, you don't really have to internalize that. You'll just hit everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the thing is then visually, and to try to keep this rooted in visuals, right, is what that means is that there's very little strategizing for enemies once they come onto the screen, right? Because if once the enemy enters the screen, the amount of time that passes between, think about it in terms of like error bars, or at least that's the way I'm thinking about it right now, which is that the enemy comes onto the screen, right? That starts when you can start to basically interact with it, right? And so the amount of time that passes between when it comes onto the screen and when you can reasonably dispatch it, right, is very, very short because your range is so long, right? And then the amount of time that then passes between when you can dispatch it, right, and when it will hit you is probably 3 times longer, So that's substantial, and it therefore makes the game way easier, especially when you can. And this is getting more into mechanics, but when you can angle your whip right the way that you can, that means that there's even less strategizing to make sure that it is in line with you. So basically, the minute that something appears onto the screen, the minute that you get the visual cue of, hey, there's an enemy, I've got to do something about that. Like half a second passes, and then you've got basically all the time in the world to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, they really changing literally just the length of the whip probably makes it a little bit more realistic in length. Because I mean, a whip is huge, like it's a gigantic weapon, and Simon is not small. So, to have the whip barely reach out in front of him is like, well, it's not a close range weapon. A whip is meant for like huge distances. So they almost should have waited to make the whip length more realistic until they had like 16:9 screens. And then they could have said like, oh, well now, because now there's, an enemy comes onto the screen and like they might do something crazy before they're close enough for you to hit them. But yeah, I want to make sure I throw this out there just so I don't forget. My way of agreeing with your comment on his mighty thighs is to share with you that I was 5, maybe 10 minutes into my first stream of this game before someone who was watching posted in chat, what is with his thighs? Just like, yeah, he's got mighty thighs and he knows it, which is why he wears like a little, mini skirt. Cause he's like, yeah, I work hard for these legs. I have to eat a ridiculously strict diet. Please appreciate my quads. But here's the thing, kidding aside, sort of, in the original Castlevania, Simon kind of power walks, kind of marches, when he steps. And he also walks like that in this game, but because you can see that the curve of his thigh muscles and you can see his calves bulging and his kneecaps out there with every confident, weirdly bent leg stride, like it kind of makes him look crazy. Luckily, there's usually more stuff going on so that you're not just walking in a straight uninterrupted line for an extended period. But there are actually a couple times in the game where you do have to do that exact thing. And he walks with the kind of confidence of someone who is not confident and is hoping no one notices. He's just like, yeah, I'm Simon. I'm coming through. Just march. It looks a little silly if you see him take too many steps without like stopping to whip or jumping or, ducking to avoid enemy fire. Like if he's just walking, I really hope he doesn't walk around town like that, because otherwise people would just, or like in his house, like imagine if he had a 2-story house and he was walking around on the second floor like that. Like you'd be like, oh God. Hey mom, is Simon home? I don't know. Do you hear an elephant marching around upstairs? Yeah, he's here.
Yeah, well, either either Simon or a 5-year-old, because I've noticed that all 5-year-olds walk around like they're elephants.
Also true.
But
maybe that's it. He's just a giant 5-year-old.
So actually, that I want to wait until we get into mechanics to make this point, but please remind me about the whip size and the march and how that kind of reframes some stuff. I've got a couple of other throwaway things for visuals. Do you have any other hard, heavy hitting stuff?
Oh, well, we have to talk about the term for it is mode 7, the programmatic way they animate stuff. Yeah. So that aged really bad. Like really bad in my opinion. And not every game we've played that has mode 7 I felt it was utter garbage. Like you can always see it, like it when you see it. They also seem to be a little timid with it because there's 2 places in the game, 3 that I could think of that really lean into it, but they're fairly short. So there's the part you mentioned where you're hanging and you just have to stare at the screen while it rotates. Which, by the way, side story, I didn't understand they wanted me to wait, so I kept trying to make an impossible jump that killed me every single time.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So lost a lot of lives doing that.
Yeah.
I had to restart the level. Very upset about it.
Good. Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. So there's that. And then in another stage, I think it's actually a later part of that same stage.
It is stage 4.
Yeah, the entire background is rotating as if you're inside of a cylinder. Like if you were walking down the center of a rotating cylinder.
Yep.
That looked like utter garbage. Like
that, honest to God, made me nauseous, and it made Megan nauseous.
So here's the thing, my dude. I don't normally get motion sick, but playing through that level, I was like, oh, this is what that must feel like. Like I am so, I don't feel nauseous, but I feel uncomfortable. Like trying to reconcile what my body is feeling with what my eyes are seeing is not good. But that segment is not very hard, so you're unlikely to have to repeat it, and it's not very long. But it's just, ugh. And then the one other time that I could think of where they lean into it pretty hard is with the swinging chandeliers toward the end. Those chandeliers are static assets that are then, being programmatically animated. And you can really see it because those pixels jump around all crazy in a way nothing else does. But again, that segment's like, it's pretty short. It's not like you kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing. You can't really just sit there and take it all in so you don't obsess over it too much. But yeah, the mode 7 stuff in this game aged particularly poorly.
I will say specifically with the chandeliers, and this is a story that I may have told on this podcast before, but they're evergreen episodes, so
every day there's someone born who's never seen The Simpsons, so you go for it.
Yep, and I know you've said that before, so that feels like makes me feel a bit more okay with retelling my thing.
Yeah.
With that one in particular, I noticed as I was jumping that your momentum doesn't carry, right? So if the chandelier is swinging forward and then you jump forward, you jump parallel with the chandelier, right? And that just made me think of I had a similar thing where at one point in a video game I was on a lift carrying me across an endlessly plummeting chasm, and I jumped and the lift continued to move forward and I plummeted to my death. And I said, oh, so like Newtonian physics don't really hold here. And Megan said, what? And I said, well, because the momentum isn't carrying with me when I jump, right? I jumped, I lost all my momentum and fell to the bottom. And Megan said, no, that's right. And I said, no, it's not. Like the momentum should carry. And she said, no. If you like stand up, then it would keep going and you would stop. And I said, honey, if that were true, planes wouldn't work because the minute somebody went up to go to the bathroom, the plane would continue to move at 500 miles an hour, and they would be pink misted against the back of the jet because they would just stop moving, and the back of the airplane would hit them at 500 miles an hour. And Megan's like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. So I say all of that to say that the Mode 7 screwed me up because it doesn't carry momentum.
I do. I like that, not resulting in her being like, oh, absolutely. It's like, yeah, I guess. And it's like, you've been on a plane.
It's just one of those things that, you know, it's a little difficult to internalize because it's like, oh, well, if I'm tossing a ball to myself, then it's just going up and down. It's like, yes, but if you're on a train and the observer is on the countryside beside it, you are throwing it in an arcing motion to yourself. It's just, again, something that if you had any STEM courses, you are likely to have seen before. But if you haven't, or it's been a while, you know, you're like, that doesn't sound right. But yeah, anyways, I always get a kick out of that particular story.
Yeah. No, I mean, I also personally, I will re-listen to that story just for the phrase pink misted, because you want to talk about concept that belongs in the visuals section of the podcast. Like, that paints a picture. I've just as one other thing I did want to mention, and then I know you said you had a couple other notes. Just the thing that this game does a lot better than the original Castlevania is because they have more space and more detail and more like storage for levels, is there's just that much more variety. Like, the original Castlevania already had like rich, different, interesting levels. They had different enemies, like not every level, but there was some variety there. Unique bosses at the end of each stage, right? So there's a lot of variety in the original Castlevania. And when they made Super Castlevania 4, they supercharged that, right? Like, there's more levels, but they're not samey. There's more variety. There is some enemy reuse, but I think there's at least some unique enemies in every single level. I don't think they ever just copy paste holes, right? Like bats and the stupid little green crawly things are all over the place. But like, there's a lot.
Skeletons.
Yeah, the stupid bone throwing skeletons. But like, there's a lot of unique enemies that are special to different levels in different parts of the game. And there's more bosses, and all the bosses stay unique, right? We were just talking about this with Streets of Rage 2, where like bosses become regular enemies, and Castlevania never does that because the bosses aren't big, powerful monsters. They're singular individuals, right? They are unique, right? Frankenstein's monster isn't one of many Frankenstein's monsters, right? Medusa is a Gorgon, but in this universe, she's the Gorgon. She's the Medusa, right? So like, I really enjoy that. It takes something that doesn't really have a super thick narrative, and it makes you, the player, kind of ask more questions, because like, you see the Medusa or the, you know, Frankenstein's monster, or even like a giant bat or the big skull or whatever, and you're just like, where did you come from? Like, what is your deal, right? And so they can spend a lot of time making that boss like cool looking and animated in an interesting way, and interact with the level in an interesting way, or the little battle arena in an interesting way, because they only have to do it once, so they can build like a little tailored experience. And that's something I'm really glad they didn't just say like, oh, well, we already have, you know, the 5 original bosses or whatever. They were like, now we need like 15 bosses.
So actually, one of your things was just one of mine. Which tons of enemy variation. You know, yeah, cosign 100%. And the only other thing I really had for visuals was once in a blue moon, they do put just a ton of stuff on screen, and that tends to clutter things up Gradius style, right? It's very, very rare that it happens, but definitely like when you're fighting the mud monsters, or if with your, you know, giganto mega whip, you're able to whip apart like 3 skeletons at a time, and they all explode into their mini explodey things. You know, sometimes that takes up a little bit of processor real estate, but again, you know, nothing too severe.
Yeah, and that is one of those things that I almost wonder if that's like a reverse nostalgia goggles situation. Like, here, I'm gonna think in real time out loud here. So a lot of games that we consider classic games, part of what made them enduring is that they were well programmed, right? So it's not that there's no classic games that don't have slowdown that people still love, but a lot of the games you remember most fondly is part of it is because they played really well, you know? Modern games, especially if you play on PC modern consoles are all PC-like hardware. So you've got loading screens, things can get bogged down, textures clip in and out of reality, and things fade in and out of existence because they're just so many orders of magnitude more complicated. I almost wonder if you put like a young kid, like, a Minecraft age kid in front of a Super Nintendo game that had slowdown, like, would they even notice? Or would they just think like, well, this is how computers work. Like sometimes they get bogged down. And then old people like us would be like, no, this is a console game. It should, everything should be instantaneous, perfect frame lock. Like, I don't know.
And for me, I think that there is some, again, like I said, it's neither here nor there, just kind of an observation. For me, it kind of does fall into like a good nostalgia goggles thing because it now if it's constant, it's irritating. But when you see it once in a while, it's kind of like the fun side of Bethesda games breaking, where it's just something that you kind of expect sometimes. And most of the time it's innocuous and sometimes it's hilarious, and you just kind of move on with life. I think it kind of hits that same type of area for me where all of a sudden, somebody is going to beat you to death unless you take a quest for them. And you're like, well, I don't think this is how the code was supposed to run, but this is now a thing I have to deal with. So,
well, and you just nailed it, right? I can't think of any time where the slowdown happened that it made me unable to play the game. It did temporarily affect my enjoyment of the game, but it never, I can't think of literally even a single time where I was like, I died because of the slowdown. And that's, that ain't nothing, right? To be able to say like, yeah, it's annoying, but it literally will never even cost you a life. Like, oh, well, okay.
Or even a hit, to be honest, So, yep. Agreed. Audio?
God, dude, the music is just so good. It's so good.
It's good.
And it's
good.
It's not just the remix tracks, right? Because they reused a lot of the same music. It's all the new tracks. It's also the remix tracks because they were good and they improved upon them with the more powerful hardware. Like I don't know why the composer for the Castlevania series, because it was the same composer for like a lot of the games. I don't know why they decided this feels like kind of a rock music, but also pipe organs, but also sometimes like strings. Like I don't know why. Like I don't know what it is about Castlevania that made this person think we're gonna just go over like every genre and we're gonna do it all and we're gonna do it all really well, right? Like I think the only thing that's not represented is like folksy, like Western bluegrassy, kind of like steel guitars sort of music, but just like 50 different genres and all done really well. And somehow the crazy thing is that they all feel coherent. Like if you queue up the soundtrack on YouTube, because you can't get anywhere officially, so you got to just listen to like a YouTube video with the soundtrack. The songs are all super different, and yet somehow you never catch yourself thinking like, but why that one? Right? Like the weird ambient scary tracks, the power rock, super inspiring tracks, like everything fits somehow. And it's great. The series has amazing music and this installment is no different.
Agreed. 100%. Co-sign on all that. Sound effects. So I
like that. Like sound effects you're starting to carve out a niche and I enjoy it.
Well, I mean, honestly, I 100% agree with everything you said. If I were to say anything else, it would just be me rehashing all of your comments. But yeah, no, sound effects. So I was honestly not very impressed with some of the sound effects in this game. More specifically, both the visual and the sound effect for hitting an enemy is it's not that great. It's just kind of like a dink, think. Like it's just it. I can't really put so like for example when you hit the metal not metal the bone skeleton geez
Oh, the stationary ones that like spit fire. Yeah.
It's Spitfire. Yeah,
they're like turrets. They operate like little turrets.
Yeah, when you hit them, like it kind of makes a dink dink noise, right? And that's fine. But the original Castlevania made like this. It doubled up on the noise somehow, and it just made it really satisfying to hit those things. In this one, I just didn't feel as satisfied hitting stuff, or even necessarily being aware that I was dealing damage. You know, there were definitely a couple of times like when I was hitting the skeleton snake dragon heads from the wall, right, where I was like, am I doing it? Am I hitting the thing? And I was, because you know your whip is huge and you can't not hit stuff. But yeah, I don't really think that the sound effects were as satisfying as they were even in the NES version of it. You know, this is my 2 cents. But what are your thoughts?
No, I'm unfortunately in like complete agreement with you, because I did notice that the sound was underwhelming. What I had failed to notice on my own was that they had already gotten this right previously, and that's what makes it a bummer. They already had a really satisfying like it's like a hit spark noise. It's like
a plink plink.
I almost imagine like if you took like a rock and you like scraped it on another rock, like that, like a flint kind of motion, or if you like dropped a piece of metal like against stone, because most of the time you have the metal whip. I don't think the leather whip has a different noise, but maybe it does, but it doesn't matter. Like it's just not, it's not satisfying, and it's not like I nothing it. Like it's if you didn't have the visual to tell the player that you were hitting an enemy, then it might be a little more disappointing. But it's like, well, I mean, I know I'm hitting them because, as you said, like I can't miss. Like swinging my whip means hitting a target. But yeah, it's just kind of like meh.
And again, you know, this is not. It's kind of like the. Is it fair to compare Star Wars 3 to Citizen Kane? Nope, but I'm going to anyway. It's like, is it fair to compare Super Castlevania to Castlevania? Or really, you know, yeah, kind of, because it is a sequel to it. But at the same point in time, Castlevania is a classic. But literally think about the sound effects that it would make when you would hit enemies in Castlevania, when you hit enemies in Mega Man, when you hit enemies in Zelda, right? That is satisfying, man. It makes a good, satisfying hit sound, right? This just wasn't that. And again, the only reason why I feel okay bagging on it a little bit is because it is a direct sequel to the original. Like you said, they got it right. And then they scaled up all the visuals and made all the enemies look super cool and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, and then how did you flub the audio on that? Like they must have just had to have started from scratch and said good enough and shipped it, you know? But
it almost feels like this is the one thing they forgot to supercharge. Like maybe this is the original Castlevania sound effect, but because everything else is louder, the visuals are louder, the music is louder, like it's being drowned out. So like in the simpler meal of the original Castlevania, this little bit of spice stood out because it was thoughtfully placed. Here, it's like drowned out by all of the other powerful flavors, right? That's almost what it feels like, is they I'm sure they didn't, but it almost feels like they took that sound wholesale and they were just like, yeah, it's fine. Just keep using it the way it is. And it's like, no, not if you turn up the volume on all the other faders, you can't leave that one down at the same level. Now it's going to sound out of sorts. And honestly, this is kind of true for most of the sound effects. Like most of the sound effects are just they're not very loud. They're not very punchy. They're not very threatening or inspiring. Like they're there and they are useful, but they're not on nearly the level that the music is. And they're not on the level that the visual, like they're not amped up the way the visuals were amped up when they got to the Super Nintendo. it is weirdly out of place how just kind of like gray they feel compared to the like vibrancy of everything else.
Well, and I think that here's my hypothesis, and I'll stop beating this horse. But this is the one other note I had for audio, which is that I think that when they built everything in the SNES, I think that they used just like whatever Konami's stock soundboard was, you know. And the reason why is because I played an unconscionable amount of Gradius 3 when I was a kid, right? I mean, I just played that game into the ground. We did a whole episode on it if you'd like to hear it. Apparently that's what I'm going to do this episode, is just shill other episodes. So because of that, I very, very much so know a very specific explodey sound that Konami games make. And this game, when you destroy the turrets, right, the dragon turrets, it makes that sound. It is that Konami stock soundboard sound. So what my guess would be is that they just populated everything from the stock soundboard, and then for whatever reason, out of time, didn't care, didn't think it was important, whatever, just stuck with it, you know. So all of these are just, none of the sounds are custom. They're all just what they already had files for.
You might be right, and I think that's one of those things that I can almost imagine an audio engineer not realizing, oh, this thing doesn't stand alone. It's part of a body of work of things Konami produces, right? It's like people make this joke about like Italian food or Mexican food or any food that it's like any culture's food where you can be like, oh, it's the same 4 ingredients, but in like slightly different arrangements, right? Like pizza and cannoli, like you just take it and fold it in half and there you go. Right. Like it's not harmful in isolation. Like the sound effects aren't inspiring, but they're not bad. But when you can say, oh, that's the Gradius sound they reused, and oh, that's like this other like metal noise that they reused, and oh, that's this magic sound effect that they reused, and oh, that's a stone crumbling sound effect they reused. Like, even if that's not literally happening, if you, the player, are just starting to feel that way, it just, one, it reminds you you're playing a game because now you're thinking about the company Konami. And two, it just kind of brings down the experience a little when you're like, oh man, look at the graphics. Oh man, listen to the music. Oh man, these sound effects.
Agreed. But again, you know, the music is spectacular, and the sound effects being lackluster, I would not say really took me out of the game. It was just kind of like that was a little disappointing, but not bad overall.
Yeah. The one other thing I wanted to say about the soundtrack, just because we have made the fish with legs analogy a lot of times because it's really useful. I think it's an excellent shorthand.
Yes, no, I would say that definitely that metaphor is not a fish with legs. It is a full on, primate, right? Like that is a fully formed analogy.
Yeah. I feel that way. Like the music in this game is a stopover worth stopping over on the journey to the absolute like masterpiece that is the Symphony of the Night soundtrack, right? Because
this guy right here.
If you listen to the original Castlevania soundtrack, you're like, oh man, this music is really good. And then if you jump forward to Symphony of the Night, you're like, oh my God, this is huge. Like you could score cinema and operas with this. This is phenomenal. It's all over the place, like rock operas. Like it's all over the place. It's fantastic. And because I have those two bookends as like what I think of as Castlevania is the original one, and more importantly, Symphony of the Night, I was afraid a little bit. Like I was like, oh, is this going to be the fish with legs where the soundtrack will be, better than Castlevania, but it won't be Symphony of the Night good. But no, dude, like this is a road stop worth making soundtrack wise on your way between Castlevania and Symphony of the Night. Like it stands on its own merits. It's not just good because the original soundtrack was good. It's not just good because you can hear some of the little motifs that they're eventually going to reuse later in Symphony of the Night. Like it's good on its own merits. And I was like, yay, it's not a fish with legs. Like, it's an honest to God reptile. Like, this is now a creature that came from the sea, but lives on land.
It does its own thing. It is the David Pumpkins of music. Gameplay and mechanics. Wait,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
controls and mechanics.
Hey, you got there. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the whip. There's nothing. The whip is everything. I literally have this note in my notes here. Whip is everything. Whip is life. Whip solves all problems.
It does. The only time when you like, I will say that I used sub weapons from time to time, but I never had to. It was never the axe versus the stage 1 boss of Castlevania, right? Like, remember the bat in Castlevania? You know, if you didn't have the axe, you were basically screwed. You know, I mean, you could beat him, but man, you had to be good at the game. Whereas this one, I never really used the sub weapons because I had to. The thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched on, right? So the whip is everything, right? The whip basically means, as I said, is that when you walk onto the screen, you can kind of hit most things. So that would be like me walking into a room and then being able to survey all of the enemies and then smiting them, right? Just like reaching out and just like hitting them. And many of them are one-hit kills with this giant monster whip, right? So you're fighting monsters though, right? So that makes it like, you know, okay that you're just kind of walking in wholesale slaughtering them, right? Now I'm not sure like who decided that they were monsters, but all of a sudden I realized that this could very easily be Undertale, right?
I mean,
because you are so much more powerful than the monsters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like the whole thing in Undertale, right? Was it's like, oh, well, they're monsters, but a single human could kill like thousands of monsters. It doesn't matter, you know? And, you know, so this is way closer to, instead of Dark Souls, where you're stuck in a room full of demons, like this is definitely Doom, where demons are stuck in a room with you, you know? And then it just hit me where I was like, no, wait, the story has been told and it's Undertale.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the narrative would say otherwise, but you're right that it's like, well, from their perspective though, but okay. Anyway, the thing I want to say about the whip, now that we're playing Super Undertale 4 on the Super Nintendo, the thing I want to say about the whip that I didn't say before, because we were leaning pretty hard into how the whip behaves mechanically, is the reason that I was able to so easily internalize the length of the fully powered up whip is because when you die, within the first 4 candles, you will get both whip upgrades.
Yes.
So
you get them immediately. You never not have the big whip.
Yes. And that's the thing that blew my mind once I realized it, because there's some levels that I struggled with, or some of the later bosses that just absolutely ate my lunch. But I was like, there's literally one, I can tell you exactly when it happened. There was one time in the entire game where I didn't have the upgraded whip like immediately. So the fly demon that he's blue, and then halfway through he turns red, who's also in the Castlevania show and in Symphony of the Night. If you die fighting him, you reclimb a flight of stairs, and then you jump over a platform, and then you're back in the boss room. And I don't know why, I don't know if I was doing it wrong, but for some reason between the stairs and him, I only got one whip upgrade. And the thing is, the weaker whip is also shorter. So he flies around all crazy all over the place. And so having the shorter whip is a massive handicap, that you never, ever, as far as I can tell, have to deal with ever in the entire rest of the game. And I died other places, believe me, there's nowhere else in the entire game where I was like, oh no, I died. I'm screwed now because I'm going to have the crappy whip, because within, like I said, 2 to 4 candles, you immediately have the better whip again. And so that's what really blew my mind about the choice to make the whip not just deal more damage, but have the insane reach, because you have this insane reach all the time. That is effectively your default state.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that it was more novel for me to not have the upgraded whip, for sure. I think also too, you don't get it when you're going into the tourney room, the mode 7 room, because you literally just spawn and go directly in there. Because I remember hanging with the leather whip a number of times, but also when you're doing that, you're fighting the
Medusopodes.
Yeah. And so it doesn't really come into play that much.
I make that joke all the time. I think that might actually be true, because if Opodes is Greek and Medusas are Greek,
it is. But and so not to take this away from you, but the challenge I would say is there's only one Medusa.
Oh, so it'd be they're Gorgons.
Yeah,
damn it.
Yeah, Medusa's a proper noun.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Even though I had to use it incorrectly, but I was doing it to test.
Yeah. No, this is fair, because if I'm ever going to actually earn that victory where I make that joke and it's actually with a Greek word, I want it to be legitimate. Like if I'm going to get that gold medal, I don't want it to be because everybody else dropped out of the race.
Yeah, you don't want the asterisk, right? So and I will say that. Okay, so not only is your whip monstrous, and you can angle it straight up and at 45 degrees, you can also just kind of freeform that stuff and change its trajectory mid-swing.
Yeah.
So again, there is nothing that you can't hit with your whip. All of that being said, I will say that the re-angling of the whip works very well as far as, it's broken in the sense that it makes you into a golden invincible god, right? It makes it you can hit everything, right? But I will say that there were a couple of times when I swatted out with my whip and then realized mid-swing that I was like, no, wait, I really wanted to swing up. So then I angled, I rolled up, and then he did kind of whip it up a little bit and would wing the thing I was trying to wing. So I believe it's working the way the designers intended, but just, the SAT question for this is, Mario is to his jump arc as Simon from Castlevania 4 is to his whip control, right? You have infinite control over the direction of your whip to the point where physics is like, no, wait, what? But that's that. That's what I have to say about the whip trajectory.
Well, and so two other things that I had struggled with the choices the game designers made is, so I'm going to call it flailing. The flailing motion you can do with the whip, where it just goes like, like a wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man. There are actually a couple times, because of the way enemies are placed and because of the way platforms are placed, where I was like, this is actually how they want me to solve this problem. Wiggling the whip around like an idiot, because that seems to be the correct way to deal with this problem. And that just feels weird because it looks so silly. It's so unserious and kind of like cartoony to just be like,
yeah.
So
no, it's weird looking for sure.
Yeah, that's weird that they ever like force you to do that. And I swear there were a few times where they did. The thing that actually like legit irritated me is, picture a Super Nintendo controller, not counting start and select, because finally we live in an era where those are not buttons used for gameplay. You have four face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons. And then you can also do combinations of like up plus A, maybe does something different than just A, right? But this game, mechanically they're awash with buttons, right? Like there's way more buttons on the controller than things you can do. So in the original Castlevania, it's, I think, up B, up an attack to use your sub weapon.
Yep.
In this, they just mapped it straight to R. I don't know why.
Yep.
But they mapped it straight to R, and L's over there. It's cool shoulder button, right? It's like, I want to do cool shoulder button things. And to me, in a game like this, L is lock. As in, let me stand still holding the L button and then whip in whatever direction I point in, but don't make me walk in that direction. And this was actually the one and only place where it felt like the diagonal whipping was slightly less powerful than it might have been, because if you could stand still and whip diagonally, there's a couple of times where that would essentially just let you avoid combat encounters, because you could stand on the stairs and whip diagonally, because you actually have to press in the direction that you're whipping, which makes you walk until you press the whip button. Sometimes you will take a couple of steps in that direction, which may put you into the line of fire. And so, I mean, it's not game breaking. You're super powerful, right? Like, you're very seldom at risk from enemies. Platforming kills you all the time. You're very seldom at risk from enemies. But I was like, you have all these extra buttons, Konami. Like, use one of them to lock me in place. And part of the reason this feels like the right choice to me is because in Super Metroid, you can lock yourself in place so that you can fire around, right? And in Cuphead, which I've been playing recently, you can lock yourself in place because you can fire in 8 directions. So it was just like, this is a thing that by this time, they were, maybe wasn't well under their belt. Because, I didn't say at the top of the show, this game came out in 1991. So by 1991, they knew that pressing on the D-pad was for movement. And so, like, I don't know, it just irritated me. I was just like, come on, like, let me lock Simon in place. Let him use those mighty thighs to stand his ground and whip without having to, like, step into it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the only way that he can whip at that angle is to, like, get a good, like, angled start and then whip across his body to get up at that 45 degrees.
He's got to take one powerful step.
One mighty step, and you see his muscles cord as he presses down into the granite and it shatters underneath his feet. So all that being said, I have 2 other kind of heavier notes. One of them is you get stuff. You get parts, you get sub weapons, you get a bajillion T-Axe upgrades. That's it though. And which means that you don't get experience or realistically any reward outside of score for killing bad guys, right? That aesthetic is, or mechanic, is to me always reminiscent of, and I think rightfully so here, reminiscent of horror gameplay, right? As opposed to empowerment gameplay, because the minute that you start giving people power-ups for killing bad guys, they are now going to go seek out and exterminate every bad guy, right? Which is not what you do in a horror game. In a horror game, your goal is to survive and accomplish your goal, whatever that goal is, right? So if there is an area that you don't have to go to, you don't go there, right? Like, I mean, I remember in The Last of Us at one point, because you do scrounge and you do forage, but there was like 3 clickers off in a direction, and I was like, I can't think of any reason for me to go down there, so I'm not going to, because I know that there's danger and a resource demand in order for me to get down there, and I don't get anything from killing clickers, so why in the hell would I ever do it, So thumbs up, I think that that's good. I am glad that the bad guys don't drop any power-ups, they don't drop health upgrades, they don't do any of that. You get all that from candles, and that's it. The only other thing that I'll touch on is, because I feel like I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't, is cycle time.
You haven't talked about cycle time on the last couple of games at all, did you?
No, man. That's what I'm saying. I've just been crazy. I've not been doing my job.
Yeah. Well, welcome back.
Yeah. That and I had good notes for audio. This is weird, because I'd say it was old George coming back, but then I'd have garbage notes for audio. But anyways, this is the new George. Cycle time. So overall, I thought the cycle time was pretty good. You respawn at kind of the stage that you're at, unless you lose all of your lives, and then you go back to the beginning of the level, which is fine. Except that it's weird, and the reason why I wanted to discuss it with this game is that I think the cycle time is fine and appropriate because of the failure spectrum when you're using your whip, right? The failure spectrum when you're using your whip is basically enormous because, like I said, you have so much time to react to anything coming onto the screen, and by extension have so much life, right, that you have to screw up pretty badly and a lot before all of a sudden it's like, okay, champ, why don't you try the stage again? All right, you're still screwing up. Try the whole level again, right? Except when they throw platform challenges at you, because now all of a sudden this failure spectrum is binary. You made that jump or you did not, right? So the impact that having a difficulty spike in platforming completely rips apart the difficulty curve of the game, right? Because if they throw a platforming section in, it is a hard wall. Because if it strips you of all of your lives going into it, like those little green spinny dealies, that like drop you into pits, I probably burned 4 lives on those, and then all of a sudden I was restarting the whole level, which to your point wasn't helping me get any better at all of the stuff I was screwing up, because that was all platforming. I had mastered that portion of the level. So I felt that anytime when they were making it a platforming challenge, it caused an inadvertent difficulty spike because of the failure spectrum set up by the whip and your life in the rest of the game, which I actually thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I don't I agree with you that they are like discordant, that moving through Dracula's castle is arguably the far bigger threat. Like just
Yes.
getting from point A to point B is the thing that is more likely to make Simon fail than all of the eldritch horrors that are floating around. I can't think of any levels where I felt like I am miles and miles from the thing that killed me, and it's going to be ages before I can practice it again. Sometimes it's like, yeah, I gotta walk over there, but it was more like, God damn it, this is harder than it should be. Not, God damn it, this is wasting tons of my time.
Agreed. No, I agree completely. I don't think that the cycle time was, at any point, even to the point where I was like, you know what, I got other stuff to do. It definitely wasn't that, but I thought it, like I said, I found it fascinating because the times when I did feel that the cycle time was more punishing wasn't because the cycle time changed, it was because the failure spectrum changed, which is something that I don't think I've had an example, quite as distilled an example to point to like this, right? Where you can have a longer cycle time if you have a broader failure spectrum, where you can, because then it feels more deserved, right? You're like, no, I screwed that up quite a bit. Like I started replaying The Last of Us, and literally I got kicked back 5 minutes of gameplay, but it was because it was in a combat section. And I mean, I pretty viciously screwed up several things in succession. And I was like, no, I deserve that. Let me go back and try again. But because most of it is like, no, I got hit by the bat, and then I got hit by this other thing, and I wasn't paying attention and got hit by the bat again. Like, that's all fine. But then all of a sudden it's like, no, I got stripped of 4 out of my 5 lives because I first didn't understand how the platforms worked, and then couldn't quite figure it out. But by the time I figured it out, I was good. But I did burn 4 lives trying to figure it out. And it's stage 4-3, not 4-1,
Well, if the combat was harder, then there would be times where you get just overrun by enemies or just beaten to death before you can do anything. And so even if you have a lot of health, there would be these instances where you're like, yeah, I have a lot of health, but there's this one spot where like a bunch of red skeletons are going to gang up on me all at once, and they will just drain my health almost as fast as falling in a pit. But that never happens. You're virtually never, except some of the bosses, which I'll get to in a second, you're virtually never in a situation where the monsters are really the main threat, where you're going to get beaten to death. And I didn't even regularly feel like I'm getting worn down to death. Like, and that, I'm not saying that it's because it never happened. I'm saying I never felt disempowered or terrorized by the monsters. I felt terrorized by pits. So like the thing that made me afraid, I'm gonna get tossed back, was virtually never like, oh man, like I've just barely made it through the super tough combat section and now I'm super hurt. Like there are a couple instances of that, but by and large, enemies are just there to make sure you know how the whip works. And it's the platforms that are the real threat, which is, yeah, I agree with you. Like it is really interesting to just be like, oh, the cycle time is fine. It's the thing that triggers the cycle time is not you being worn down. It's instantly being thrown back in time.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. It's really closer to, Celeste, right? Or like Mario with just the platforms, where all of a sudden it's not the bad guys that are going to get you. Generally, it's just falling to your death. And then I died. You could die.
So I need to talk about the bosses because this is actually maybe my largest single complaint about this game. Were you able to finish by any chance?
No. I got to stage 6.
Okay. So there's like 10 or 11 stages, and then there's like the final stage, like stage B, is literally just 4 bosses in a row. It's this one hard boss, it's this other hard boss, it's death, and then Dracula. So and there's continues in between those. So like you can, this game has a password system. You could get a password right before Dracula and right before death and right before the demon thing that changes color. So like the boss rush is hard, but if you die, you start right at the beginning of that boss. There's no stage. Like you're just right into the boss fight. And there's actual passwords that will load you into any of those places, which I think is just awesome. I don't know how granular the passwords are in between the individual stages because I never stopped in the middle of a stage. But my point is this: the whip solves all problems right up until the end of the game. I am not exaggerating when I say I think 9 out of the 10 stage bosses I beat by literally standing still and just wailing on them. No jumping, no sub weapon. Yep. It's just I could deal them damage faster than they could deal me damage. And I came really close to death on a couple of them, but I literally stood perfectly still and just whip, done. And, the first couple times I was like, well, okay. And then boss after boss after boss, that tactic worked without fail. And I was like, this is kind of disappointing because like the original Castlevania bosses were hard. Like you really had to like duck and weave and bob and move and like jump over stuff and duck under some projectile.
Strategize and be like, I'm going to use this as protection. And maybe if I throw my sub weapon from here. And
yeah, like a lot of interesting gameplay was tucked into those bosses. And so I was legit disappointed that these bosses were so damn uninspired. Fun side story. When I was fighting Medusa, I swung my whip and she hit me with like her stone gaze, which freezes you immediately. Yeah, it freezes you instantly in place. So it froze me with the whip out, which continued to damage her until she died. So I actually didn't even have to kill her. She basically killed herself on me. Like she committed suicide against my whip. It was really weird.
She did like the Urukai thing where like you stabbed her and she like pulled herself forward onto the whip.
Yeah. It was so bizarre. But I mean, like that's how uninspired the boss fights are until you get to the boss rush. So the 4th boss is it looked kind of like a pterodactyl skeleton, but it's like on its feet and it's got the spear it's a glaive. That boss is hard. Like it moves all over the place, jumping, flying in. It's got a ton of invincibility frames. So you have to hit it and then immediately retreat because it will hit you while it has its invincibility frames going. It is unlike every boss that came before it. And then the demon thing that's flying around is like, sometimes he's out of your range and it's like, oh my God, out of my range, even with the giant whip. Like, and he flies in a pattern that's like not quite on the northeast southwest trajectory. So sometimes you can whip under or over him, and then he hits you and you feel like an idiot. So like that one's super hard. And then Death moves a million miles an hour and he's got his little scythes that are just flying all over the place. He can suck you in and he throws his scythe. So like you have to be running from him and then jump over. It's hard, dude. Like when you get to Dracula, there's like the flames flying around and then he makes these like little balls appear and they look exactly like the fireballs, but if you hit them, chicken falls out of them so that you can get health. It's the only boss fight you can. Yes, I'm serious. It's the only boss fight where you can get health during the boss fight, which is like super clutch. But I say all that to say this: you play 95% of the game, and for that 95% of the game, monsters are not a threat. They're a complete cakewalk. And the ones that can't be beaten in one whip shot take 2 or 3 or 10, but you can stand there and just wail on them until they die. And then they just totally like 180 degrees pivot, and they're like, hey, the whip no longer solves all your problems. You got to duck and weave and bob and move. And suddenly what they've done is they've taken the platforming mechanics that you've been dealing with and they've stuck them into a combat situation in a way that makes sense, like code wise, like at a super low level programming sense, but you have not been getting trained for it thematically. You have not been thematically conditioned to be in platforming mind and in combat mind at the same time, which they should have been doing. And the original Castlevania got right. Like the original Castlevania got right. It forced you to deal with the clunky jumping and the clunky whipping when every single mistake potentially resulted in death, not because you fell in a pit, but because the boss was nailing you over and over. And I was like shocked. Like that's the summary of my monologue here, is like, I was just shocked that they not only screwed this up, but only managed to screw it up for a portion of the game. And then we're like, oh crap, wait, the boss encounters are supposed to be interesting.
Yeah, and I am wondering like why that is, because I agree with you 100%. Like the way I handled every single boss fight was to just sit there and just beat the hell out of them. There's one skull boss that drops rocks on you, and that one I just realized I just had to wait till it just whips straight up, and eventually he'll come over me, and then just to beat him to death. So agreed 100%. And yeah, I'm not sure if the idea was that well, we can't make this, because the original Castlevania had like 5 bosses,
Either 5 or 6, and then Dracula, or around there,
something like that,
yeah.
Right? But this one has a million bosses, right? So there's a million levels, So I don't know if they thought like, oh man, we can't make every single boss fight that difficult because no one's going to deal with that or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, agreed 100%. I am glad that they eventually said, no, you had your fun. Now, if you want to say that you beat the game. But it is that does make for one hell of a difficulty spike.
Yeah. And you can tell because there's those continues in between. There's no level leading up to those bosses. It's literally just prove you can beat this boss. Like, they were thoughtful about it, but why? It's like if you were making a peanut butter sandwich and you just put all of the peanut butter in like one corner of the bread. It's just like, well, yeah, nice. But I mean, it's all in there, and it's like, spread it out a little.
Kinda, but yeah, that's pretty much all I had. Did you have anything else?
No, my final just random thought that I wanted to share is because I love Symphony of the Night so much, going up to fight Dracula is like almost a 1-to-1 of going up to fight Dracula in Symphony of the Night. It's the same kind of staircase. It's the same little room. It's so the same that when I died like the 50th time trying to beat Dracula, I swung, just to like give myself a chuckle, I swung at a part of the wall that I know in Symphony of the Night has secrets in it. And I was just like, where are my secrets? I need better armor so I can defeat Dracula. Because like, that's how much of a match it is, which had an interesting psychological effect on me, because I was fighting Dracula, and in Symphony of the Night, when you fight him the first time in the beginning of the game, when you get his health all the way down, he transforms into a gigantic monster and it becomes a total shit show. So I was really struggling, and I was like, oh my God, am I going to get his health all the way down and then I'm going to have to beat him again? And thankfully the answer is no. He transforms at half health, and then you get him down and then you're done. I was like, I wouldn't be feeling all this anxiety if I wasn't thinking of how this fight goes in Symphony of the Night.
If you weren't just immediately like externalizing that and saying like, no, but clearly there's more. Obviously there is, because there's more in this other game that I love. So what do you think, man? Does it hold up?
Yeah, I say no nostalgia goggles required. No nostalgia goggles required. And if, like a lot of people our age, you either are deeply in love with the original Castlevania or you're deeply in love with Symphony of the Night, and like you either missed this one or you never really gave it a chance, like it's worth going back for. There's like the Castlevania set anthology, whatever, on the Switch. So if you don't have original hardware and you don't emulate, because you shouldn't, because it's wrong, you can still very easily get access to this game legitimately. So like, I would say this is actually worth going back for, even if, like me, your Castlevania is Symphony of the Night, or like your Castlevania is the original Castlevania. Like this entry stands on its own, and it's a shame it fell between the original Castlevania and Symphony of the Night, because the thing it's actually proximate to is Castlevania 3, which sucked, and Castlevania 2, which also kind of sucked. So like, if they made the original Castlevania and then did nothing and then said, okay, we're going to remake it for the Super Nintendo, I don't think this game would have been kind of like almost lost to history the way it was. Even with the crazy whip, even with the weird difficulty spikes and stuff, like I could recommend this to anybody. Like, it's a solid entry in the series.
Oh yeah, no, agreed 100%. No nostalgia goggles required. For me, this game's like a neutral good, which is to say that, you know, as far as the mechanics built into it, the way the game is crafted, like it's not perfect, right? It's not lawful, right? It's not chaotic either, where it's just all over the place, right? You know, it's solid, but the game is fun. It just is, you know. It's definitely more like potato chips than, you know, like a very refined meal, right? You know, so if somebody said to me, you know, hey, like, what's the best game ever made? This wouldn't make even the top 50 for best games ever made. But if people said, what's the most fun games you've ever played, this one may have a scrapping chance, because it's fun. It's a game that you can plug in. It's enjoyable to kind of walk through. It's also not exceedingly difficult. So it's one that, you know, if you're looking for a game for your 8-year-old to start kind of getting into playing video games, stuff like that, I mean, and you're okay with some of the darker theming. Yeah, you know, I mean, like queue up Symphony of the Night, or I mean, yes, queue up Symphony of the Night. Also queue up Castlevania 4. Because man, you know, you just plug that thing in and you whip it good.
The curtain falls, the music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black, and you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone, there's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creeping with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less on how you saved the day.